We are so grateful and excited to have Ty Powers here. Ty, of course, is the co-founder of the Insight Yoga Institute. He and his wife, Sarah Powers, founded the IYI, or Insight Yoga Institute. In what year, Ty, did you found IYI?
2009, I believe it was.
2009. Fantastic. And that's about the same time I started studying with Sarah and you, of course. So it's so interesting. And I'm so grateful for having this opportunity to talk and share your wisdom today and all that we have learned and from you and Sarah. So it's such an important time right now to talk about these things and share practices and methods and techniques that can really keep us cared for during this really challenging time.
Yeah, I'll be interested to hear from some of the questions what people are grappling with in this particular group.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'd love to just jump right in and get started today. Ty, you've been a Dharma teacher for over 20 years now. Mm-hmm. You've been practicing yoga and mindfulness for well over 30 years. What has been the most transformative experience for you personally from this committed long-term practice?
I think the most transformative moment was with something that's called in the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism, the pointing out instructions, and it's pointing out the nature of one's mind. I think before having, and I'll explain what that is in a minute, but I think before having those instructions, there was this this play of continually trying to just think better thoughts and have better feelings. That was the dance. So chasing that. And then once the nature of my mind was pointed out, and there was the recognition that I'm not my thoughts and I'm not my emotions. And not only that, that's only the first bit of it, that the mind itself, the heart mind itself, is a much larger container that's much more mysterious, much more open, much more creative, and so on than I thought it was. So that was kind of a seminal moment. From that moment forward, there was a little more lightness of being that arose as a result of not feeling tied to thoughts and emotions one after the other, as is often the case for so many of us. So that would be the big one. And from there, everything just kind of fell into place going into mindfulness. So rather than attempting to keep something out of play, a certain thought or a certain feeling, there was this invitation now into the vastness of that, pointing out that the mind was vast and open and knowing and caring and so on and so forth. And then once there was an actual experience of that vastness and that openness and that caring quality that the mind actually has at its deepest level, then there was a kind of a wandering that started to occur in that framework, and a lessening of the tie to tie, if you will. So there wasn't this kind of strong parameter for what I thought I should be or who I thought I was. And so that loosening really started to feel like the expression of freedom that you hear so much about in the traditions, especially the Buddhism.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yes, freedom.
Freedom.
You know, I think that's what we're all kind of striving for, that in a way, and we could just kind of invite it in.
Yeah.
So, and you know, you said so eloquently just now, I think we're all really curious about why mindfulness meditation specifically is so supportive in helping. And I think from a beginner's view in, so if you could take what you just said and kind of apply someone new to the practices coming in and getting really curious about, well, how exactly where do I start? And, you know, we're all looking for this freedom. Mm-hmm. And we know that mindfulness meditation is specifically a remedy for working with thoughts and emotions and feelings. But how does it work? Where do I start?
I think the first thing I'd say is it cultivates the ability to meet things as they are and where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that those of you who've been on retreat with me have heard me say many times is um, you're going to need to get comfortable being uncomfortable in order to really mature. And so this maturation process of being able to meet experience as it is one of the first things that starts to arise with the mindfulness practice. It allows us to tolerate things that we haven't necessarily tolerated to this point. We all know the feeling of not being able to tolerate certain emotions, certain people, certain thoughts. We know how certain thoughts condition certain feelings. And so what we tend to do normally is, and this works to a certain degree, and it's wonderful to a certain degree, normally we just keep moving the pieces around, okay, arranging the pieces in a better fashion. And that arrangement can have the feeling that, now I have some control over my environment, my thoughts, my feelings, and so on. And that works, as I said, to a degree, but it doesn't work ultimately. And it's not as skillful as, it's kind of like the story of the king that walked out of his castle onto the streets barefoot with his entourage. And after walking a few feet, he hurt his feet, and got angry about it and said, I order the kingdom to be paved in velvet. And his advisors, kind of got with him and said, wouldn't it work a little better if we just made a pair of shoes for you? So it's kind of like this. Instead of moving the external pieces around in order to make ourselves feel better about ourselves and our life and so on, it makes a lot more sense to actually know what to do on an internal level in order to meet those circumstances, rather than trying to always manipulate them in the way that feels most comfortable to us. So the challenge, get comfortable being uncomfortable. That happens straight away in a meditation practice. We've all had the experience of sitting down, and the first thing that goes is, the sensations in the body feel like, I don't want to be confined like this for much longer than this. So there's the admonition at that point to, rather than have to get up or to move, see if you can breathe into that for a moment. See if you can tolerate that discomfort and see what that does. And then as a certain emotion may arise that's uncomfortable, see if you can just be with this emotion a few more breaths. And what you start to do once you start to get on to that being an actual skill you can cultivate is you start building capacity to do more of that. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that's the best basic explanation for why to even start doing that in the first place. One will be able to tolerate a lot more in one's life. And of course, there's no better time than right now to work with what feels for so many intolerable, all the way up to death.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Unbearable. There are days, right, that we're all experiencing, especially for those of us that have a practice and we've been, gathering insights in these practices, and sometimes these emotions fall into our hands and we look at them and we're working with this discomfort and we're growing our capacities there. And I'd love to get into the IFS work and why and how it works and blends so beautifully with the mindfulness practice specifically, and just providing a foundation on what internal family systems is, how it works with the insights we're gathering from the mindfulness practices, and why and how it works to work with the insights once they're dropped into our lap or into our hands.
Okay, so very basically, the IFS model is one in which the basic idea is that we have an internal family. So there are, in this case, those internal family parts are called exactly that, parts. So this work was created by Dick Schwartz, but the work actually goes much further back. It goes all the way back to an Italian psychologist named Assagioli. He was a contemporary of Freud and Jung's. They knew him, they knew of him, they respected his work. And his work talks about something called sub-personalities, which is very similar to this idea of us having different parts. So some of the work I've done with the Buddhist teacher and friend, Phillip Moffitt, he calls these various inner parts committee members. Mm. So it's very similar. So the idea is that we all have various committee members, various parts inside of us. Those parts represent various viewpoints that we either consciously adopted or unwittingly and unconsciously adopted from a variety of different areas. From our family, obviously, first and foremost, family of origin, from mom, dad, or whoever the primary caretakers were, from our country, from our time in history, from our race, from our gender, and so on. And so all of these various ideas or views that we have inside of us are vying for a certain kind of attention. Some of the views we have inside of us are congruous with other parts, some are not. So it's said that the idea of what a whole person feels like is when these various parts are in communication and in some sort of, at least détente, relationship to each other. So they don't have to necessarily fully love each other, but they do have to respect each other. And so another model that I like to represent how this looks and feels is the model of the benevolent king or queen. So in the case of the model, the benevolent king or queen would be us at our best. So that's, in IFS, it's called self with a big S. Mm-hmm. And that benevolent self, it's one directive in the king queen aspect is the protection of the realm. And so you can imagine a king queen energy sitting there in the center of, let's say, this big table. Think of the committee members again, and the various representatives from parts of the realm are coming and sitting around the table. They all have their own views about their little world and how that's going to connect to the larger view. But basically, they're not so concerned with the larger view. They're concerned with their own. And so it's the job of the king queen energy or self energy in IFS to really figure out how to bring this all together. Mm. And so one of the first dovetails in mindfulness that I just kind of mentioned is the getting comfortable being uncomfortable, is the ability to now look at these various aspects of ourselves called parts, especially the ones that aren't working, especially the ones that are screaming at us, yelling at us, the critics, and so on and so forth, the ones that are upsetting the system, the ones that we actually don't like or don't appreciate. And we'll need, first and foremost, like that self big S energy, to tolerate them, but not just even tolerate them, to recognize what's behind the activity that's causing them to be disruptive in the system. Mm-hmm. And so what IFS does so beautifully, I found, is it helps us to begin to coax those parts out in a way that doesn't pathologize them. And that's really a big one for everyone to hear here. Because in some types of therapy, and it's not necessarily the directive of the therapy, but it happens that the therapy begins to make certain aspects of ourselves feel like they're bad or wrong and just need to be banished. What was a little different about IFS was it was saying, no, there's no bad parts. The parts may be acting in a distorted fashion in the system, but their motivation is to get us to be some form of perfect in their view. And so if we can start to connect to the motivation that they have for trying to upgrade the system, then we can work with them a little differently. We're not so angry with them, and we're not feeling the need to banish them. And so again, this mindfulness vision of being able to see things, vipassana, the meaning of vipassana, to see things clearly or to see things as they are, gives us the capacity to start to look at the parts of ourselves that we don't like so much, that we don't want to look at, that we just want to push aside and forget about, and so on. So I hope that, is there another question inside that? I hope that gives a little bit of a...
Well, yeah, it was beautiful, beautiful explanation. I want to see what else is there as far as compassion goes, because it sounded like, you know, the IFS work stacked with mindfulness. There's also a wing of compassion there, or metta, self-compassion to the parts themselves. Correct?
So if you're not looking at a part as not supposed to be there,
Mm-hmm.
as some sort of violation of the system, that right there, just that slight shift in perspective allows you to view the part, like I said, kind of from the motivation the part is bringing to the system. And that brings a great sense of compassion to how you work with the part.
Yeah.
So rather than being angry with it for the way it is, there's a recognition that it's got some very good reasons for behaving the way it does. And, excuse me, and these various parts of us were mostly tethered at much younger times in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so their methods for trying to get us to behave properly are fairly coarse, fairly young, fairly immature,
Mm-hmm.
fairly gross. And so it's very hard to want to even listen to a part that's critical and yelling at us, or a part that a certain aspect of mom or dad or some other part of society gave it. And so if you begin to go to the motivation again, then there's this sense of, oh, okay, all right, I understand. And maybe I can help. Maybe I can give you a different perspective on how to get your needs met.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than trying to pound them into seeing things differently, where the idea is to kind of coax that out.
Yeah.
And that's a very compassionate way to approach any system, right?
Yeah.
Certainly our own system. We know when we yell at ourselves, it doesn't do well. It gets things done. That's the problem with it. We know that the critics inside of all of us have a way to whip us into shape.
Mm-hmm.
But what IFS is finding is that that's not the most skillful way. That's not the best way. And those parts of us that behave in that manner, actually, if you start to coax them out, if you start to let them recognize that the ways they're behaving are ways they felt they had to behave when they were young, which is when they were tenured, if we start to let them know that there's a different way for them to get our attention and to skillfully support us in the things they're trying to get us to see and do and be,
Mm-hmm.
then they start to feel their own sense of freedom. Because what's been found for myself and many others is the parts really feel trapped, especially parts that feel like the system doesn't like them and wants to exile them. They actually feel that.
Mm-hmm.
And so to start to give them the possibility of a new way of behaving in the system is an unburdening for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that unburdening is very compassionate. So that goes right to, what are we doing as a bodhisattva, which is the meaning of someone who wants to lessen the suffering of all beings,
Mm-hmm.
lessen the burden, lessen the suffering. And so that's the dovetail. It happens naturally.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So beautiful too. Because there's a lot of gratitude there.
There's a lot of gratitude there. And that's back to what I was saying about the non-pathologizing. So you're not viewing parts as if they're a problem. You're viewing them as the immature possibilities that they actually are.
Yeah. And there's a lot of parts coming up for people right now.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Now I've been working with parts and,
Mm.
you know, with this work, and which I'm so grateful for. And so, and because of the dramatic uncertainty, the groundlessness that we're in the midst of, what is that doing to the big self? What is that doing to stir up some of these tethered young parts that perhaps, we're finding ourselves more reactive or more fearful?
So
How
that's
does that
it.
relate? Yeah.
Well, that's it. I mean, there's tremendous fear and uncertainty right now, and it's part of our human DNA to feel that fear and that uncertainty. So I guess the first thing I would say is, okay. So embrace that. That's part of what's, if you will, called for at a time like this, because fear and uncertainty have the possibility of engaging our creative parts.
Mm.
So we are incredibly creative beings. This is our birthright. This is what we do. Everything that we see around us was in someone's mind before it spilled out. And so in that fear and uncertainty, there's the possibility to imagine differently. So what so many of the people I'm working with are doing, myself included, using this fear and uncertainty to resort. So what is most valuable to me right now? And if I'm not living those things, how might I do so? And what's in the way of doing that? What am I waiting for? And certainly, if people are fearful of their jobs, certainly fearful of their health, what can I do right now in order to be with that? Well, what can you do?
Yeah.
What can you do? So my offering is, this is how things are. So the Buddha Dharma, that's where it asks us to go first and foremost in preparing ourselves for a time like this. Change is inevitable. It's the nature of all things. And with change comes uncertainty. And so going back to what I said earlier about mindfulness, this desire to move the pieces around until they're in the perfect position so that we feel safe and comfortable, that does work to a certain extent. And now with something like this, we're all seeing the ultimate nature of reality, which is not just about how well we manipulate the pieces. Now, yes, of course, we're going to manipulate these pieces with eventually a vaccine. But in the interim, we're all just going to have to open our palms to what comes next, what's going to happen with my job, with my bank account, and so on. And so what I counsel people to do in a time like this is to really become even clearer about what you care most about and see if you can live that. So what's vital to you? What's valuable to you? Mm. And so, are you being kind? Are you, especially if you're in relationship and you're in a household all together and you can't escape each other, how accepting are you of the different ideas, the different values, the different ways of living? How precious are you looking at the things that are around you right now? Are you using this time to lament what you've lost? Or are you using it to do some preparation for how this could happen no matter what, through something we cannot at all foresee in this moment at a future time? How are you conditioning your heart to be able to accept that which arises, which couldn't be seen? Now, of course, in this virus, we knew there were people who knew this could happen and were saying so, but I'm talking about something much bigger than this virus. Mm-hmm. It's a call. It's a spiritual call. Is what it is. And for whatever way that word strikes you, God, Allah, Yahweh, the Buddha, all that is, this is a call to actually transcend the normal ways we try and apprehend what reality is and what it means. So,
yeah. Lots of questions and
lots of questions. So, I
yeah.
think the greatest teaching is, you've heard this from me before. Question your answers. They don't answer your questions, and I think it would. First of all, I don't know the answers. One, first and foremost, and two, I'm finding this time very useful to myself by asking more questions.
Mm.
And there is a resorting that's going on for Sarah and I as a result of what's going on. We've had to cancel retreats. We thought, oh, we'll just cancel the one that was in April that's supposed to go on just now, and we'll just cancel the one in May. And then now we're looking at, given all how the statistics are rolling out, and this is, for all of you there, whatever it is for you. Well, okay, so it looks like, there's going to be a lot of cancellations, a lot of money given back, and so on. And what's that going to do? What's that going to mean? And so we'll just have to meet that in that moment. I think this is really an opportunity for everyone to find out what resilience really means to them. Mm-hmm. So Sarah and I have, and I think I said this, I think I did, in something we just sent out to our group. We've had the opportunity at a couple of different times in our lives to really fall apart. In other words, go bankrupt and really go all the way down to the point of being at the mercy of friends and family and sleeping on people's floors, not staying in any one place too long to make sure we weren't, outdoing our welcome. And it was really an incredible humbling. Mm. And not only in the humbling of it, but it was a call to action. So what can we do in this? And at that point, we didn't know, obviously, what to do, or we wouldn't have gotten ourselves in that predicament in the first place. Mm-hmm. So now, how to get out of this? And so it just called on, our better angels to first of all, to ask for help, which we got a lot of, and then to just figure it out as we went along. And this is also, I think, what's called for is, as I said earlier, a reminder that we have a lot more creativity in us than we give ourselves credit for. And so I would offer that all of you who are listening, find that again, discover that again. Many of you already have it. Many of you are already using it, but really it's your birthright and you have it. So.
It's so beautiful. What was coming to me, what I got really curious about when you were talking through those last couple of minutes is the incredible amount of courage that I heard coming from you. You guys there? Did I lose? Okay. Ty?
I'm here.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah, I'm just listening.
Just so much courage in that, and just digging deep and being resourceful and leaning into this trust that we're born with it. It's in our cells. It's primordial wisdom that we come in with. And I just would love to talk just for a moment about that and cultivating courage as a part of this resilience.
So, I'm not just being humble here. I wouldn't have called it courage. Maybe I'll look back and call it that for sure. But it was born of, I don't know what to do. I'm at a loss here. And so that's why I'm equating it with what can happen for anyone listening at a time like this. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's happening. And the resilience, what I started out to say, Sarah and I have been resilient, have been made to be resilient in a couple of different areas of our life. That's forged a courage that we now know and feel and have and believe in. Mm-hmm. And so my encouragement is use this for that, because it will do that for you. It will do that for you. It's, if you don't have the opportunity, if, so many of us right now are doing fine in the midst of this. And when I say so many of this, I have friends and family who are safe, have enough money in the bank, job is not an issue or not a worry. Everyone around them is healthy, and so on and so forth. So, and even many who are enjoying. In fact, I was just on a session with someone earlier today who was afraid for the lockdown to stop. She's enjoying herself so much. She just said, I don't want this to, I'm going to have to go back to doing all the things that, that I didn't feel I had the time to do in this. And that's a whole other story. But so many are not having to feel the pain and the suffering. And so the resilience isn't called forth. And so I think at a time like this, that's what we can think of it as, a potential, a calling forth. This can call forth all that we need to be with it and to move through it and to move on at the next level of our personal development. We can all use it personally in whatever ways it can conduct itself on us as personal development. So courage is forged.
Yeah.
Courage is forged. And courage looks different at different times. I mean, there were times when just close the door, get under the covers, and let's watch a movie. So, and I'm not saying that in a time like this that there isn't a beauty to that as well, but I'm talking about using stimulus-based events to distract us from the work that needs to be done. I also think that there's a time and a place for that. There's a kind of mercy, as David White says in one of his poems. Denial can be merciful.
Yeah.
Until we're ready to really face the next day or the next step and the next moment, the next phone call we need to make, whatever it is, denial can be a compassionate act for ourselves. We're not ready to face it. We're not mature enough. How did we get here in the first place? All those questions. So.
Yes, it's very appropriate. Very appropriate reminder right now, especially for those of us living in the States, because there is this pressure right now to be really productive and push through this and get things back to normal. And there's been some resistance that we've seen, especially from really wakeful communities that recognize that there's an opportunity in the midst of this to just be in it, just slow down.
That's I would say that is a privileged view, though.
Right.
Because for those who are really struggling, for the next paycheck and so on, or with loved ones who are sick or dying, or and on and on, it's much more difficult to do anything but just attend to the moment and to the fear. It is a kind of a luxury to be able to sit back a little bit and to say, all right, I have some choice. So many people feel like they don't have choices.
Right.
And in some very real sense, they don't have the same choices. And there's levels of choices in the world, to be sure. I mean, having money provides a lot of choices that a lot of people don't have. So this resilience that we can have, sitting in our nice homes, and I'm not denigrating any of that because I'm doing it myself, and I'm so appreciative that that's what I have.
Yeah. I'm
just saying, it doesn't require any resilience necessarily. Right. So.
Right. No, I'm glad you said that. And because I read this article and it said, the hashtag, we are all in this together. And it just kind of ripped that apart. And it said, no, we are not all having the same experience.
Oh, no.
And it is a privileged view to think that we are.
Yeah.
You know, and on that note, we're also seeing that in different parts, communities, in underprivileged and undersupported communities, we're seeing higher risk of infection. We're seeing higher death rates, especially in the Black community. We're seeing that they don't have the same resources that most people have. And it's something that needs to be acknowledged and addressed. And so I'm happy that it's part of the discussion.
And so am I. So I think, so this is the view that I have, that the beauty that may come out of this, that I think is already coming out of it, and hopefully will come out in a much bigger way. It's the rallying around a common cause, as you said earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and the recognition that we're all in this together, and that if our brethren are suffering,
Mm-hmm.
um, so are we on some level.
Yes.
And yeah, so what can we do? What can we do to help relieve some of that suffering? So whatever it is you personally can do, if you can do it, do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also caution, because I've run into a lot of people I'm working with who are feeling a lot of guilt. And I'm cautioning you not to feel guilt. It's not the necessary way to take the feelings of feeling helpless and wanting to help. Just whatever it is you can do, the smallest thing, do it, and that will be helpful. And bless your heart, in the same moment that you're feeling the guilt, let's transform it into the good work that you can do.
Right. Right. So good advice there. That's very good advice. I'm thinking about and you've already kind of given us such beautiful examples of this, but I'd like to understand how specifically this crisis has shifted your role as a teacher. How has it impacted how you're teaching, what you're teaching? Where do you feel called forth right now specifically? What has been really inspiring to you and motivating to you personally?
So I think the way that I'm having to work more with people individually is with fear and uncertainty. And what that kind of brings up is, this is how it is.
Yeah.
This is how it is. This is how it's always been. This is how it will always be. Yes, we'll plan and we'll do, and we'll move the pieces around, as I said, and we'll place things in a way that will make us safer than not. And that's all well and good and beautiful. And let's by all means do that. And fear and uncertainty are part of the journey. It's the hero's journey.
Yeah.
So there's, in this spiraling, if you will, of maturity, going in this direction, it's a circle. And each time we go around in that circle, we meet some of the same forces that were blocking us from ascending the circle. But they're the same things. We hit them again, but with more maturity.
Mm-hmm.
Fear and uncertainty are part of that wheel. And so if we really take that in, then we say, as I said earlier, okay, here it is. Here it is again. And now, for many of us, for perhaps most of us, I am more mature than I was the last time I faced fear and uncertainty. And so now, what will I do?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than what all too many do, which is say this shouldn't be here. This shouldn't be happening.
Mm-hmm.
Blaming presidents, blaming China, blaming, which is not to say there are appropriate ways to lay responsibility, but for our own inner work and processes, no. What can I do now? Yeah.
Right. So
And
as the capacities change, right, and shift, it's another opportunity.
it's another opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Another opportunity. And so if we, so part of well-being is having a view that allows for all that arises in experience to be, that's how it is, to be just perfect as it comes.
Mhm.
To hold that view, to hold that perspective, is to meet it without feeling betrayed by life. This
Yeah.
is how it is. Not betrayed, not even feeling betrayed by our old ignorances, right? Just, no, this is how it is right now. I was less mature before, and I'm a little more mature now. And rather than railing against the less mature self that didn't plan better for this outbreak, we bring that onto the path.
Yeah.
It's called bringing adversity onto the path. That's part of the Buddhist path. Here it is. Get busy.
This is what I work with now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Ah, so helpful. So incredibly helpful.
So I'm actually teaching workshops based on this theme. They're called Change and Transition. And I learned how to teach these workshops from Phillip Moffitt. Beautiful, as I said, friend, someone who's always been looking out for me. He's always been kind of pushing me in the background as a friend and as a teacher. Anyway, in these workshops, the first thing that is brought up is that change is a constant impermanence in the Buddha Dharma. It's a constant, and transitioning change is not. So in teaching these workshops, the first thing people get to meet and understand is that change is the nature of existence. Transition requires some work.
Yeah.
It requires some understanding. It requires a different view. So if the change that we see happening is one that we brought on because we planned it and it's worked out well, then we're happy and we feel like, lovely, responsible human beings, as we should. But if the change is brought on and we feel like we can transit the change because we thought it through, and then if the change is one that's brought on by circumstances or by something that we think should not have happened, in those cases especially, transition tends to be difficult. We tend to blame the change for not being the nature of all things. And so there can be a stubbornness that arises, a resistance to the change in viewing it as something that should not have happened. So the first thing to open to is, this is how it is, as I've said, this is how it is. And so now if I'm seeing this is how it is, it's going to be much easier for me to appropriately position myself to transit the change.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm not willing to look, at it clearly, it's just much more difficult. I'm gonna fold my arms and be angry and feel betrayed, as I said before, by life.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's you've been offering this in a workshop format.
yeah.
And you are you planning on having any offerings through
I was.
technology?
I was. Yeah,
Yeah.
just canceled another one. Yeah, I'm not sure when that's going to happen. I'm talking about doing another one here in London in the fall if we don't have a resurgence. So
Right.
that's the idea.
Yes, very
Yeah.
good.
I'm talking about with New York Insight about doing something there, potentially December, with this in mind. We will see.
We'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see. Very good. Well, I know that there's some questions coming in,
Okay.
and
And
we have about 12 minutes.
okay.
So I wanted to give our audience an opportunity to ask them, and we have some great questions coming in. So I want to encourage all of you to go ahead and just chat the questions in, and I'll go ahead and read them to Ty. So the first question came from Dr. Christine Keisinger. And she said, I'm curious as to how knowledge of the parts and how and why they arise could alter one's parenting, or how knowledge of parts, the foundation of IFS, lives out in a close relationship?
All right, so let's break that up into two. So the first part, repeat, please, for everyone to hear.
Oh, um, do you want me to repeat the whole question?
Oh, just the first part.
Yes, I am curious as to how knowledge of parts and how and why they arise could alter one's parenting.
Okay, so this has a lot to do with the creative imagination. So in our imaginations, we can we can see a rope and think it's a snake. And if we think it's a snake, our body will react far differently than if we think it's a rope. There'll be this entire chain of events that go on physiologically, um, in fear and fright and so on. And so it works the same internally when we go back and reimagine those various positions, I'll say, that we were in with the various parts. At the times, those various parts felt like they weren't seen, they weren't heard, they weren't attended to. So that is basic abandonment. And this happened to all of us, most of us, to be sure, in some way, shape, or form. There was some one or more caregiver who didn't see us for what we were. They wanted to mold us into what they thought we should be. And so in that feeling, we felt abandoned. And so what we started to do in that is we started to replicate that to ourselves, for ourselves, that abandonment of those parts of ourselves we thought were wrong or bad, that those original caregivers said were so, and we believed them. And so they don't have to be around anymore. We can do that to ourselves now. And so and we can go back in now from the perspective that we have now and attend to those parts now without abandoning them in the same ways we've continued to abandon them since that whole event started. And so that Dick has found, I've found, and many others, hundreds and thousands of others now, therapists and clients, that there's actually something that does occur. The work has been studied. It's been studied and found to be efficacious the way it works. Something shifts internally when we go back and nurture those parts that weren't nurtured by our original caregivers. So Christine, does that help you?
Yeah, I was just curious, if you know all of this, or people that are practitioners or therapists, how this knowledge impacts how they parent. But if you know all of this and you've studied it, you've done it. So I'm assuming that that would then change how you parent. It as opposed to how you might have parented prior.
Oh, to be sure. Yes. So as I said, molding your kids in the image you think is the best image for them. I think what it does as a parent is that you begin to nicely, I would say, question. So who is this person, this little person in front of me? And how can I best nurture who they seem to be to themselves rather than trying to make them be the way I think they should be, as I said. So it is definitely a much kinder way to parent. I would say it's a much more difficult way to parent because there are things that children do that are sometimes very difficult to attend to. The parents that are feeling, at home and stuck with kids right now are feeling a lot of this right now. I'm hearing a lot of that. So I think one thing, and this is not IFS, but appropriate to this moment of saying this, is if a bit of advice that I was given that was really wonderful. If you see something you don't like in your child, just wait a while. So I kind of tolerated a while. And there's something, things come and go, parts of the personality form and unform. And so if we don't make things such a thing, there's the possibility that it will just, dissolve of its own nature and accord. So does that help?
Yeah, such good advice.
So the second part to the question, would you read too?
The second part is, How does knowledge of these parts of the foundations of IFS, how does that live out in close relationships? So in partnerships or in a marriage, perhaps?
So, whoa, boy, does it live out.
And I think you answered part of that when you talked about you and Sarah in this process of resorting. You know,
Yeah.
that you can do this kind of work in your partnership.
You can.
Mhm.
What can be difficult is relationships are often, if not largely, based on what we're familiar with. So we will, you've all heard this, you all noticed this at some point, we will marry, our dad or our mom or whomever sometimes, or certain aspects of them. And so it seems to be something that we're attracted to that allows us, or can allow us at least, to work out certain parts of our personality that needs to work through. And so what happens in relationship with parts work is that very often what you're working out is counter to what they're working out. And this is where something called in IFS protectors arise. Protectors are parts of ourselves that manage us, that protect those more vulnerable parts from feeling many of the hurts that happened earlier in life. And so we've developed these masks and these ways of being that are protective. And very often they kind of meet up against our partner's protective parts. And so you've got two immovable parts going at each other. And so if you can know this, if you can start to identify the protective parts and what they're protecting, then you can start to lower the shield if it feels safe enough with the right partner. And so that's how it works itself out, or can work itself out in a relationship. And it may be, if you start to work on your own parts and you recognize where they come from and their motivation for acting the way they do and what they're protecting, it may be that the partner you're with, you start to recognize is not the right partner for you to work this through, that the partner is just trying to reinforce with its own needs the parts of you that don't need to react in that way anymore. So there's also that.
There's a lot there. A
Yeah,
lot
there's
there.
a lot there.
Yeah. Yeah, but so helpful. Okay, so there's there's a bunch of more questions. Okay, I'm going to ask this question because I think that probably we're all having an experience like this to some extent. And it's from Mariah. And she said, what do we say to family members who are engrossed in conspiracy theories? I understand my own part in my reaction, and I could see their parts. Yet, is there anything that I could say that may give them a little insight in the nature of their thinking?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And hello, Mariah. I think I know who that is. If that's, yeah. Anyway, I think that is more along the lines of really listening through is what I would say one could do with a family member or a friend who's going at it like that. And the listening through is the listening to, trying to listen to what they're really, really afraid of. So first and foremost, we're not going to change anyone's mind if they don't want it changed, or if they feel that whatever information you're imparting is coming at them in a judgmental form. Like, you shouldn't feel this way. You'll feel much better if you feel that way. Even if you feel the latter, you'll feel much better if you just, don't take it on like this. You need to be sure that you're not feeling that as you're saying it as some form of judgment, because we can pick that up so easily. So if, Mariah, there's an opportunity where you feel you could offer, would you like to think another way about that? If you could do it in that way, then there's the opportunity to open it to another discussion. But I've found with a lot of people that that I've engaged who have conspiracy theories, they're pretty strong with them and pretty strong about them, and they feel pretty self-righteous around them. And so if that's the case in this case, I would see things as they are, which is to see things as, at least at this point, somewhat immovable, and just back away. Just change the conversation, leave the room, just say, okay, one reporter's opinion, and you leave it at that. So the work of going around trying to change people's hearts and minds is, that's not the work that I would invite you to take on. Mm. You know, if you're being asked, that's one thing, but yes, of course, you know, when we see people suffering and it looks like we can help, that's a beautiful aspect, the heart opening to wanting to decrease suffering, but you really have to look carefully at what you're dealing with. And it may not be you that's going to deliver the message. So just know that.
Yeah.
This may be a necessary, you could even say merciful thing for them to hold on to, that this provides some measure of control for their system. That's who did it. That's what's going on. That makes them feel just a little bit better, even though you see it doesn't. But inside their own system, that works on some level.
Thank you. Ty, I'd like to, just being respectful of time, we're just about there at the 3 o'clock hour. And I wanted you to go ahead and share how our followers, our audience, and of course we'll post links to Facebook and Instagram and all of your ways to connect. Is there anything else that you would like to share or say to this group as we're moving forth into this and with all of this, kind of wrapping this up with one word of wisdom?
A word, or I thought of a poem.
That's perfect.
All right. So it's title, and it's actually by William Martin. So the title is, "What Will Be Left is Life Itself. Each day that passes, the sage discards another useless weight. Finally, all the accumulated burden of a life spent seeking something is gone. In its place is a lightness of being and a clarity of seeing that makes a heaven of each moment. Make it your daily discipline to lay aside one little thing, a tiny fear, a simple preoccupation, a useless book, a piece of household clutter, a habit of avoidance, a bit of shame or guilt, a desire that distracts, even a good intention. What will be left is life itself."
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank everyone.
Yes, thank you.
I hope it was helpful.
Yes, it was so helpful. We appreciate you. We bow to you. Thank you.
I'll bow back.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here with us today. We will have this recording posted within the next 24 hours on the Studio B website.
Bye, all.
Bye, everybody. Have a wonderful day.